Imagine a bustling Roman metropolis, full of life, art, and culture. The streets of Pompeii are alive with activity. Merchants haggling in the markets, children playing in the alleyways, and families going about their daily routines. It is a city thriving in the heart of the Roman Empire, a place of luxury, wealth, and prosperity. But what no one could have known, as they went about their day, was that the ground beneath their feet was about to betray them. The very mountain that loomed in the distance, Mount Vesuvius, was stirring, waking from centuries of slumber, ready to unleash unimaginable destruction upon the city. The eruption came without warning, as a violent explosion shattered the calm, sending plumes of ash and smoke into the sky. Within hours, the city that had stood for centuries would be buried beneath a thick blanket of pumice and ash. Chaos erupted as people scrambled to escape, but the disaster was too swift, too brutal. The streets that once thrived with life were soon filled with panic, confusion, and a suffocating cloud of ash that blanketed everything in its path. The once vibrant city would never be the same, its inhabitants forever frozen in time. The eruption didn't just destroy a city, it wiped out an entire way of life. The people of Pompeii, their daily lives, their culture, and their stories would be erased in a matter of hours. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius wasn't just a natural disaster. It was an event that would leave behind a haunting reminder of the fragility of human existence. And as the ash settled, it left behind a city preserved, frozen in time, waiting to tell its story to those who would come after. This is the story of Pompeii's dying days, the eruption that swallowed an entire civilization and left a ghost town, buried under the weight of history. For centuries, Mount Vesuvius had stood dormant, its peak covered in a veil of silence, seemingly a distant threat. To the people of Pompeii, the volcano was just another feature of their landscape, a towering presence that loomed in the distance, but never intruded on their lives. Life in the city flourished, and the mountainside was dotted with vineyards and farms, with the people oblivious to the looming disaster beneath their feet. But in the weeks leading up to the eruption, something started to change. It began subtly, small tremors that rippled through the ground, barely enough to be felt, but unsettling enough to raise suspicion. At first, the earthquakes were dismissed as natural occurrences, part of the region's seismic history. The people of Pompeii, accustomed to the occasional tremor, paid little attention, believing it to be nothing more than an ordinary quirk of living in such a geologically active region. Soon, however, the signs became more pronounced. The earth under their feet began to shift with greater frequency, and sulfurous odors filled the air. Strong, foul smells of rotten eggs that drifted through the city, carried on the wind. These were not the usual smells from local industries, but the unmistakable odor of volcanic gases. Still, life in Pompeii continued, its people too busy with their daily routines to pay serious attention to the warnings. The tremors became more frequent, and the sulfur became more pungent, but the citizens shrugged it off as little more than the oddities of nature. The elders and city leaders, having never witnessed a major eruption in their lifetimes, believed that the volcano was simply in an odd phase, with no real cause for concern. As the weeks passed, the quakes grew stronger, but there was no panic, no mass evacuation. Instead, the people of Pompeii went on with their daily lives, farming, trading, celebrating, living in the same vibrancy they always had. The markets were full, the baths were crowded, and the amphitheater rang with the sound of cheers. They remained unaware that the mountain's restless stirring was no mere anomaly. It was a precursor to an event that would obliterate everything they knew. The signs were there, but the people of Pompeii never saw the volcano's true fury coming. They had no way of knowing that the ground beneath them, once so stable, was about to betray them in the most horrific way imaginable. The first eruption came suddenly, without warning, shattering the false calm that had hung over Pompeii. It wasn't the gradual rumble of an earthquake, or the faint tremors that had preceded it. It was a violent explosion that shook the city to its core. A deafening roar erupted from Mount Vesuvius, followed by a blinding flash of light, as the volcano sent massive plumes of ash and smoke high into the sky. The eruption was so powerful that it could be seen from miles away, casting a dark shadow over the once sunny city of Pompeii. The sky turned ashen, and the sun vanished behind the choking cloud of smoke, plunging the city into a premature, unnatural darkness. For a few moments, the citizens were paralyzed, unsure of what had just happened. The familiar landscape around them had changed in an instant. The ground shook violently, and the air grew thick with the sound of rumbling eruptions. It took only moments for the first wave of panic to set in. Some ran into the streets, looking for a way to escape, while others, gripped by disbelief, remained frozen in their homes, unsure of what they were facing. The terror was palpable as people struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster. Some thought it might be a temporary event, something that would pass like any other seismic tremor, while others feared the worst, but could not fathom the full scale of what was unfolding. Soon, the ash began to fall, soft at first, like a light dusting of snow, but quickly becoming heavier and more relentless. It coated everything: the buildings, the streets, and the people. The citizens of Pompeii scrambled to cover their faces, but it was impossible to escape the creeping, suffocating weight of it. Visibility plummeted as the ash thickened, and soon the city was enveloped in a dark fog, with only the vague shapes of buildings and panicked figures barely visible. The air turned toxic, thick with the smell of sulfur and the acrid stench of burning. In the chaos, people tried to flee, but the streets became clogged with others, desperately doing the same. The pathways became difficult to navigate, and many were forced to stumble blindly, trying to find some sort of shelter or escape. Panic set in as the realization hit. This wasn't a minor eruption, this was something far worse. With each passing minute, it became clearer that there was no safe place to hide. Those who remained indoors found themselves trapped, as roofs began to cave under the weight of the falling ash, and the choking dust suffocated the air inside their homes. Confusion spread quickly, and fear turned into frantic desperation. No one knew where to go, and the few who tried to escape by foot found themselves unable to outrun the mounting disaster. The eruption had caught them completely off guard, and now they were left to grapple with the terrifying reality. Pompeii was dying, and there was nowhere to hide. What had begun as a sudden eruption was rapidly becoming an apocalyptic event, and for the citizens of Pompeii, it was too late to change their fate. As the eruption intensified, the falling ash became a relentless torrent, blanketing the city in a thick, suffocating layer. What had begun as a light dusting quickly escalated into a catastrophic downpour, coating everything in its path. Inside the homes, the situation was even worse. People who had taken shelter inside their houses, hoping for protection, soon realized they were sealed in, unable to breathe, unable to move. The air was thick with ash, making it nearly impossible to take even the smallest breath. Every inhalation was a struggle, each breath turning more labored as the toxic air filled the lungs. The suffocating dust coated their skin, their eyes, their throats, clogging everything it touched. Even the most prepared couldn't escape its deadly grip. No amount of cloth could protect them from the fine, sharp particles that worked their way into every crack and crevice. Outside, the air was thick with choking ash, falling like a silent avalanche that seemed endless. The city slowly smothered under its relentless weight. The once vibrant streets of Pompeii, filled with noise and life, were now eerily quiet. The only sound was the soft hiss of the volcano in the distance, and the occasional rumble of collapsing structures. People stumbled through the suffocating air, their vision obscured by the ash storm, their movements slow and confused. Those who tried to leave their homes found themselves swallowed by the thick, ashen fog, the city's outline becoming lost in the haze. The ash began to accumulate at such an alarming rate that it seemed like the city was being buried alive. It wasn't just a natural disaster. It was as if the city itself was being consumed by the earth. The weight of the ash grew heavier, and people became more and more desperate, trying to flee but finding the escape routes blocked, their vision lost in the suffocating dust. What had been a vibrant city was now a tomb, buried slowly and steadily by nature's fury. The air, thick with dust, became a deadly prison, and the silence that followed the eruption felt suffocating. There was no sound of escape, only the distant crack of buildings collapsing, and the gasping breaths of those struggling to survive. The people of Pompeii were caught in a nightmare they couldn't escape, as the city was slowly swallowed by the relentless blanket of ash. As the ash and pumice continued to fall, the true fury of Mount Vesuvius was about to reveal itself in a way that would seal the fate of Pompeii. The pyroclastic surge, the final, most deadly stage of the eruption, swept down from the volcano with terrifying speed. This was no ordinary volcanic event. The surge was a fast, moving cloud of searing hot gas, ash, and rock, racing towards the city at incredible speeds, reaching temperatures of up to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a suffocating, unstoppable force, and it moved with a ferocity that gave its victims no chance of escape. Those still caught outside, unaware of the coming surge, had no time to react. The heat was instantaneous, burning through the air as it rushed toward the city, turning everything in its path into ash or bone. People were overtaken by the surge within seconds, their bodies suffocated by the hot gases, their skin searing from the intense heat. There was no warning, no time for escape. The surge was a wave of death, and it struck without mercy. For those who managed to flee to the outskirts of the city, it was too late. The pyroclastic surge caught up with them, consuming them in a fiery, suffocating wave. Some collapsed instantly, their lungs burned away by the superheated gases. Others tried to escape to the shores of the bay, only to be overtaken by the surge, their last moments spent desperately gasping for air that wasn't there. Their bodies were preserved in twisted, agonized positions, frozen in time by the eruption's final act of destruction. The heat of the surge was so intense that it left behind no trace of life, only the charred remains of people who had been obliterated by nature's wrath. The final blow of the eruption, the pyroclastic surge, didn't just destroy Pompeii. It wiped out any chance of survival. Buildings that had managed to survive the initial eruption were incinerated, reduced to rubble in an instant. The city's streets, once filled with the sounds of life, were now silent, except for the distant roar of the volcano. By the time the surge had passed, Pompeii was a city of death, its inhabitants frozen in the moment of their final terror. The city was buried under layers of volcanic material, and the survivors, those few who managed to escape, were left to carry the haunting memory of a civilization erased in a matter of hours. When the eruption finally subsided, Pompeii was left in utter devastation. The once thriving city was buried under layers of volcanic ash, pumice, and rock, its buildings reduced to rubble, its streets obscured beneath a thick, suffocating blanket of debris. The eruption had not only destroyed the physical city, but had also trapped the very essence of Pompeii in time, as if nature itself had decided to freeze its final moments for the world to one day uncover. What remained of the city was a haunting shadow of its former self, an empty, lifeless shell buried deep beneath the volcanic material, waiting to be forgotten by history. For centuries, the city remained lost to the world. The ruins of Pompeii were hidden under a thick veil of ash, untouched and undisturbed, forgotten by time. No one knew the exact fate of the city, and no one could imagine the scale of the catastrophe that had befallen it. Pompeii's secrets remained buried, trapped under the same volcanic material that had destroyed it as the world moved on. The people of Pompeii, along with their culture and their stories, were lost to history. It wasn't until the 16th century that the first signs of Pompeii's existence began to resurface. Excavations started in earnest in the 18th century, and as layers of ash were carefully removed, the true scale of the disaster began to unfold. The city's streets, homes, and even its walls, preserved under the weight of centuries, slowly emerged from the dark tomb of ash. But it wasn't just the buildings that were revealed. The most chilling discoveries were the bodies of the victims, perfectly preserved in the ash that had buried them alive. As the ash solidified over time, it formed molds around the bodies of those who had been trapped in the final moments of their lives. These molds captured their positions in their last moments, bodies frozen in panic, their faces contorted in fear, their arms raised in defense against the suffocating cloud of ash and gases. Perhaps the most eerie discovery was the preservation of everyday objects, household items, jewelry, pottery, and even food, frozen in time, just as they had been the moment before the eruption struck. The scenes that emerged from the excavations were haunting. A child's toy, left abandoned in the street, an unlit lamp, and looted treasures, all still in place as if the people of Pompeii had simply stepped away for a moment, not knowing that they would never return. What Pompeii offered was not just a glimpse into the past, but a tragic time capsule, each perfectly preserved body, each object frozen in place, telling a story of lives suddenly and violently interrupted. The discovery of Pompeii's ruins became one of the most important archaeological finds in history, offering a chilling look into the final moments of a city caught in nature's fury. Pompeii was no longer just a name in the annals of history. It became a preserved, tragic memorial to the sudden, incomprehensible destruction of a thriving civilization. In the end, Pompeii's final moments were not forgotten. The city, buried for centuries, had risen again, speaking through the remains of its people. Each body found, each artifact uncovered, revealed not just the destruction, but the lives that were lived before the eruption. The victims of Vesuvius were now immortalized in time, their last moments forever preserved in ash, offering an eerie and poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the power of nature. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius was an unfathomable disaster, one that destroyed not just a city, but an entire way of life. In the blink of an eye, Pompeii was wiped from existence. Its people, their culture, their dreams, all consumed by the relentless power of nature. The eruption serves as a stark reminder of how fragile life is, how quickly everything we know and cherish can be obliterated with no warning and no mercy. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius didn't just bury a city, it buried the hopes, dreams, and lives of those who lived in Pompeii. The city's legacy is a stark reminder that we are all at the mercy of nature's unimaginable power, and that nothing is ever truly permanent. History is dark, and we must remember it.